When my wife left town for the weekend, I thought I'd finally get some peace. I didn't expect her nephew to show up, or for the night to end the way it did. It happened about a month ago. The house had been quiet for hours. That kind of stillness only comes after someone leaves for a few days, taking their whirlwind energy and all the noise with them. My wife, Laura, had flown out that morning to visit her sister in Seattle. Just a short weekend trip, she'd said, all smiles and perfume as she dragged her suitcase down the stairs. I kissed her goodbye at the door, waved as she climbed into the waiting taxi, and stood in the hallway long after it pulled away, letting the silence creep in around me like a tide. I'd expected to feel peace, maybe even relief. What I hadn't expected was the loneliness. Not the kind that comes from being alone. Something deeper. Something that had been growing inside me for months, maybe years. And now, with her gone and the house finally quiet, it had room to stretch its limbs. I wandered from room to room, straightening things that didn't need straightening, wiping counters that were already clean, doing anything to avoid acknowledging just how empty the place felt without her voice filling it. I was standing at the kitchen sink, drying a glass I hadn't really used, when the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the silence, sharp and sudden. I frowned, set the towel aside, and crossed to the front door. When I opened it, there he was, my wife's nephew, Evan. He stood there with one hand hooked on the strap of his backpack. His shoulders looked relaxed, but there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes that caught me off guard. "Hey," he said with a small smile. "Hope it's okay I stopped by. Aunt Laura said I could crash here this weekend while she's away." I blinked, surprised. She hadn't mentioned anything. But of course she hadn't. I forced a smile. "Oh yeah, sure. Come in." Evan stepped past me, and the air seemed to shift as he entered, like his presence brought something warmer, more alive. He dropped his bag at the foot of the stairs and turned back to me, running a hand through his slightly tousled hair. "I can take the guest room or the couch is fine," he said. "Just didn't want to stay with my mom this weekend. She's having one of her everything is a mess phases." I nodded, trying not to stare at the way his shirt clung to his chest or the faint line of sweat along his collarbone. "Guest room's made up. You're welcome to it." He smiled again, that easy, disarming grin that was hard to look away from. "Thanks. I owe you." "You hungry?" I asked, already turning toward the kitchen, needing a distraction from where my thoughts were drifting. I was just about to make something simple. "Sure," he said, trailing behind me. "If you're cooking, I'm eating." We ended up in the kitchen together, a quiet rhythm settling between us. I chopped vegetables while he leaned against the counter, telling me about his classes, his part-time job, and how he'd finally dumped his on-again, off-again boyfriend after too many ignored texts and broken promises. I listened, asking questions here and there, grateful for the conversation, even if I couldn't shake the growing awareness of how close he was. He'd grown up since I last saw him. The shy boy who used to hide behind his mom at family parties was gone. Now he moved with a quiet confidence, and looked at me with eyes that didn't flinch. Dinner was casual stir-fry over rice at the small table by the window. He cracked jokes that made me laugh more than I should have, and I caught him watching me between conversations, like he was waiting for something I hadn't offered yet. After we cleared the dishes and cleaned up, we ended up in the living room. The TV buzzed in the background, some movie neither of us was really watching. He stretched out on the couch, legs in front of him, while I sat at the other end, a bottle of beer sweating in my hand. "So," he said after a while, tilting his head toward me, "what do you do when she's gone? You get the place to yourself. Must be kind of nice, right?" I hesitated, swirling the bottle. "I guess. It's quiet." He studied me, something unreadable in his gaze. "You ever get tired of being alone in your own house?" I looked up, caught off guard by the question, and by how much it landed. "Yeah," I said after a pause. "More than I expected to." He nodded slowly, then reached for the remote and muted the TV, plunging the room into a softer kind of quiet. "You don't have to be tonight," he said simply. I didn't answer right away. My heart was beating faster than it should have. There was a new weight in the air now, a stillness that hummed with possibility. And he was watching me. Not as a nephew, not as a guest, but as something else entirely. I should have said something, should have deflected, stood up, made some awkward joke and gone to bed. But I didn't. I just sat there, letting the silence settle, letting him stay close. Evan didn't move, and neither did I. The TV cast a dull glow across the room, shadows flickering gently on the walls. But neither of us was watching anymore. He shifted slightly on the couch, tucking his legs under him so he faced me fully now. One arm draped over the backrest, his fingers casually toying with the fabric between us. Close enough to feel, but not touching. "You look tired," he said softly. I gave a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "That obvious?" He shrugged, offering a small, knowing smile. "Only if you know what to look for." There was something strange about the way he said it. So easy, so unguarded. He didn't shy away from looking at me, really looking. And there was no judgment in his eyes, just presence. Like he saw through the polite smiles and small talk I'd worn for years like armor. I set the beer bottle on the table and leaned back with a quiet sigh. The room felt warmer now. I couldn't tell if it was from the heat, or just the awareness of him beside me. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting my head rest against the cushion. "You always keep this much inside?" he asked, voice lower now, gentler, more intimate. I opened my eyes again, turning toward him. "What do you mean?" He gave another one of those half shrugs. But it wasn't casual. "You just seem like someone who doesn't get asked how he's really doing. Like maybe no one knows what's actually going on with you." I didn't answer right away. He was right, of course. Most people didn't ask. And when they did, it was just something to say, not something they expected a real answer to. "I guess I got used to not saying much," I said finally. "It's easier that way." "But not better," he replied softly. "Not for you." A pause followed, one of those quiet moments that stretches long enough to feel like it means something. And then I felt it, the air shifting again. Like something passed between us that neither of us had said out loud. His hand moved, slow and subtle, closer to mine where it rested on my thigh. His fingers hovered, not quite touching, just brushing the fabric, close enough to feel the electricity. I looked down at his hand, then back up at his face. He didn't look away. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice lower than I intended. "Nothing," he said softly. "Unless you want me to be." There was no smirk, no teasing edge, just quiet honesty, vulnerability, and the kind of gaze that hands you something fragile, waiting to see what you'll do with it. I should have pulled back. Should have reminded him of what this was, of who we were, of the lines we weren't supposed to cross. But those lines felt blurrier than ever. With the house this quiet, with my wife hundreds of miles away, with him sitting this close, saying things I hadn't heard in years. "You shouldn't be doing this," I murmured, more to myself than to him. He gave a soft nod, but he didn't move away. "Maybe not," he said, "but I want to." And then his hand landed on mine gently, a slow, tentative press of fingers over fingers. He wasn't asking for anything, just being there. "I know you're married," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know what this looks like, but I also see how alone you are. I see how long you've been going through the motions. And I don't think you deserve that." My throat tightened, a sharp ache catching me by surprise. It wasn't just the words, it was how he said them. With sincerity, with care, with a kind of quiet affection that left nowhere to hide. "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted. "That's okay," he said gently. "You don't have to know." His thumb brushed the side of my hand, slow, deliberate, like he was trying to soothe something deeper than skin. Silence wrapped around us again, but this time it didn't feel empty. Felt full, heavy, charged. Then he leaned in. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't rushed. It was the kind of movement that gave me all the time in the world to stop him. But I didn't. I just sat there, breathing him in, watching the way his face tilted closer, how his lips parted slightly. And when they finally touched mine, I forgot how to breathe. The kiss was soft, so soft it barely felt real. A question more than a declaration. A quiet test. Would the world fall apart from this one small moment? Didn't. Instead, I leaned in. Just a little. Just enough. Our mouths met again. Slower this time, fuller. And when I let my hand turn beneath his, when I gently squeezed his fingers in return, I felt him sigh into the kiss. We pulled back after a moment. Still close. Still silent. The space between our mouths warm with breath. I shouldn't be doing this, I whispered again. But the words had lost their strength. I know, he murmured. But we are. And I hadn't stopped it. I don't know how long we sat like that. Close enough to feel each other's breath. Too afraid to move and disturb whatever fragile, charged thing had settled between us. The house was still cloaked in silence. But it wasn't the kind born from absence. It was something new. Something that lived in the space between our mouths, suspended and weightless. Even when we slowly pulled apart, I could still feel the shape of his kiss lingering on my lips, like the warmth of sunlight long after it's dipped below the horizon. It wasn't the contact that overwhelmed me. It was the intent behind it. That quiet, undeniable truth he'd laid bare. The way he looked at me, like I was someone worth kissing at all. Evan didn't speak. He just sat there, eyes steady on mine, still holding my hand like it tethered us both. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't asking for anything. He was simply present. Fully. In a way few people ever are. And for the first time in a very long time I felt seen. Not just as a husband, or a host, or a man who cleaned up after everyone else had gone to bed. But as me, the man beneath the roles. The one who'd spent too many nights folding laundry in silence, waiting for a kind word that never came. I looked down at our hands again. His fingers were longer than mine, his nails neat. The back of his hand smooth and young and sure. Without thinking, my thumb grazed the soft skin below his knuckles. When I looked back up, his eyes were already there, waiting. No pressure. Only patience. I keep trying to talk myself out of this, I murmured, my voice barely a breath between us. His lips curved into the faintest smile. Me too, he said quietly. But I think we've already passed that point. I didn't answer, not with words. But the silence that followed was an answer all its own. Full of everything I didn't know how to say. I shifted slightly, turning toward him more fully, and in doing so my leg brushed his. It wasn't accidental, and neither of us pulled away. Evan exhaled slowly, his gaze flicking to my mouth and then back to my eyes. I could see the way his chest rose and fell quicker now. The soft flush rising along his throat. He leaned in again, slower this time, watching me for any sign of hesitation. There wasn't one. I didn't stop him. I didn't want to. The second kiss was fuller, deeper. His mouth moved against mine with quiet confidence, like he'd waited a long time for permission, and now that he had it, he wasn't going to waste it. I responded before I could think. My lips parted slightly, letting him in, letting myself open in a way I hadn't in years. My hand moved from his to his shoulder, then up into his hair, fingers threading through the soft strands as he shifted closer. We were drawn together by something older than fear. He climbed gently into my lap, never breaking the kiss. One knee on either side of me, settling his weight warm, solid against my thighs. I inhaled sharply at the contact. The full press of him against me sent a jolt through my chest. His arms wrapped around my neck, his breath unsteady now, his lips exploring mine with the kind of attention that felt like memory, like discovery. Our bodies moved slowly, carefully, like we were learning a new language through touch. My hands found his waist, then his back, pulling him just a little closer, needing to feel him. He was warm everywhere, radiating heat through the soft fabric of his shirt, and I could feel his heart beating fast against mine, matching pace for pace. He pulled back for only a moment, his eyes half-lidded, his mouth slightly parted as he caught his breath. "You feel amazing," he murmured, voice husky with disbelief. I didn't know it could feel like this. I swallowed hard, my hands still resting on his hips. It's been a long time since I felt anything close to this. At that, his brow furrowed slightly. Then he leaned in and kissed the corner of my mouth. Then my jaw. Then lower along the curve of my neck. Each press of his lips was a slow burn. When his tongue brushed my skin just briefly, my hands tightened at his waist, pulling him closer without even meaning to. I felt him smile against my throat before he whispered, "Then let me remind you." I had no words for what followed. Only feeling. Only the soft rustle of fabric as I pulled his shirt up and over his head, revealing smooth skin stretched over lean muscle. My hands slid across his back as I rested my forehead against his chest, just breathing him in. So, warmth, and something I couldn't name, but knew was his. He let me take my time, didn't rush, just held the back of my head, gentle and still, letting me move at my own pace. I looked up at him again, unsure what showed on my face. Fear, guilt, longing. But if he saw it, he didn't flinch. He just leaned down and kissed me again, deeper this time, with a kind of passion I hadn't realized I'd missed until it wrapped around me like a tide. And then, slowly, our bodies began to move together. Not rushed, not certain, but real, insistent. I stopped thinking, stopped questioning. I let it happen, let him lead in some moments, and let myself guide in others. Though the act itself carried weight, consequence, taboo, danger, it wasn't what undid me. It was the way he touched me, with care, with patience, like I was something he wanted not just to have but to understand. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't careless. We moved through the night like two people rediscovering what it meant to be wanted, to be chosen, to be seen. And long before it was over, I knew I'd remember every second. The room felt different now, not just from the heat that lingered in the air like a pulse, but from something else, something quieter, heavier. Felt like we'd slipped outside of time. Beyond the walls, the world might have still been turning, but none of it felt real. Not the clock on the nightstand, not the faint sounds behind the curtain. All I could feel, truly feel, was him. Evan hovered above me now, his shirt long gone, his chest rising and falling in the soft light from the window. His breath caught as my hand slid slowly down his side, pausing at the curve of his waist, then tracing its way back up across the lean stretch of his torso. He looked down at me with eyes that weren't just full of want, but of something deeper, something I didn't have a name for yet, but I felt it all the same. His hands moved to my chest, pressing flat against my skin. He leaned down, placing a kiss between my collarbones. Unhurried, deliberate. When his lips parted and I felt the warmth of his mouth against the hollow of my chest, my eyes fluttered shut. I wasn't used to this. Not this softness. Not this care. Not this quiet reverence. Every movement of his lips, every path his fingers traced across my skin, felt like a question. One he was letting me answer. At my own pace, I reached up, cupping the back of his neck and pulling him down until our bodies aligned again. His skin was warm, the muscles of his back flexing beneath my hands as he shifted over me. The press of his hips drew a soft gasp from him, a breath against my lips that made me hold him tighter. He whispered my name then, just once, softly, like it was a secret he'd been waiting to say. And the way he said it, something in my chest twisted. No one had spoken to me like that in years. Maybe not ever. We moved slowly, finding a rhythm that had nothing to do with urgency and everything to do with closeness. He wasn't performing. He wasn't pushing. He was exploring. The curve of my stomach beneath his hand. The line of my jaw beneath his mouth. The breath that caught in my throat when my hands slid down to steady his thighs. At some point, the world outside us faded completely. There was no more thinking. No more remembering who I was supposed to be. Only this. Only him. He guided me to my side, then again to my back, our positions shifting slightly but always close. Always together. And when we finally came together fully, it was slow, careful, like something sacred. His forehead rested gently against mine, our fingers threaded beside my head. We didn't move at first, just stayed like that, breathing, feeling, connected in a way I hadn't ever known. When I opened my eyes, his were already on mine, filled with emotion, with want, with something almost too pure to name. And then we moved, not frantic, not desperate, but with something closer to devotion. Each shift of his body felt like a promise. Each kiss along my throat, a quiet confession. I didn't speak, couldn't, but I didn't have to. He understood. He moved slower when my breath faltered, faster when I held him tighter, always adjusting, always aware. It was the kind of attentiveness that made every part of me ache. He kissed me through it, through the tension, through the climb, through the breaking. And when I reached that edge, it wasn't harsh or hurried. It was quiet, intimate. My body arched beneath him, my hand gripping his tightly as I let go. And in that moment, I didn't feel ashamed. I didn't feel guilty. I just felt free. He followed soon after, his breath catching as he buried his face against my neck, his body trembling with release. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him through it, grounding him as he pressed against me, like he wanted to disappear into me completely. When it was over, we didn't speak. Not right away. He collapsed beside me gently, one arm draped across my stomach, his fingers tracing slow, aimless lines across my side. Our breathing slowly returned to normal, the silence now filled with something different. Not tension, not guilt, but an aching kind of peace. Evan nestled his head into the crook of my shoulder, his bare legs tangled with mine beneath the sheets, and I couldn't bring myself to move. The weight of him felt right, natural. His thumb traced soft circles along my ribs, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low, filled with something I couldn't yet name. I don't want to pretend this didn't happen. I turned my head slightly, brushing a kiss into his damp hair. Neither do I. You're not like her, he said quietly. You actually feel things. I let out a slow breath. That might be what's gotten me into trouble. He lifted his head a little, looking at me with a crooked smile. If this is trouble, I don't mind. I couldn't help but smile back, my thumb brushing along his jaw. He leaned into the touch, eyes falling closed for a second, like it was something rare. Maybe for him it was. We lay there for a long while without speaking, just existing in the quiet that followed. The room had cooled slightly, but under the covers we stayed close. Skin to skin, heartbeats in sync. I felt the tension in him fade gradually, his breathing evening out, his grip on my side softening. I watched him fall asleep, the lines in his face relaxed. Even the furrow between his brows, always there, even when he smiled, had smoothed away. He looked younger like that, and peaceful. I stayed awake long after his breathing turned deep and steady. I stared at the ceiling and listened, to the low hum of the refrigerator down the hall, to the soft creak of the house settling into itself, to the faint sighs he gave in his sleep, like his body was still letting go of the day. I knew what we had done. I knew what it meant, and still I didn't regret a second of it. The stillness in the room now wasn't like the stillness earlier in the evening, when the house had felt too empty to bear. This silence was warmer, thicker somehow, filled with shared breath, with the scent of skin and sweat, with the echo of things we hadn't needed to say aloud. Evan slept beside me, his head still tucked into the hollow of my shoulder, one arm draped low across my waist. It wasn't a performative gesture. Felt unconscious, sincere. I hadn't moved in what felt like an hour. I was afraid that if I shifted even slightly, the spell of the night would break, and reality would come rushing back in, with all its noise, its questions, its consequences. His breath brushed softly against the side of my chest, slow and even, a rhythm that calmed me more than I wanted to admit. I lay there in the dimness, eyes wide open, tracing the shadows above us, the slow spin of the ceiling fan, the faint outlines where the walls met, the stretch of empty space beyond that seemed to stare back at me. There was a familiar ache settling in now. Not physical, emotional. It was that strange weight that follows closeness. After longing has been answered, after desire settles into something quieter. It was the moment when you stop reacting and start thinking. And God, I was thinking too much. I could still feel the imprint of him on me, the brush of his lips on my collarbone, the warmth of his hands on my sides, the way he'd whispered my name, like it belonged to him. He had touched me with a tenderness I hadn't realized I was starving for. He'd seen through the layers I'd built, years of restraint, detachment, and reached something buried deep, something I'd long stopped believing anyone would even try to find. Now, lying here beside him in the quiet wash of moonlight, I felt a quiet panic rise in my chest. I didn't know what to call it, only that it was sharp, real. My wife would be home in less than 48 hours. The thought alone sent a ripple of unease through me, not because I feared her return, but because I wasn't sure I could go back to pretending after this. What Evan and I had shared tonight hadn't been reckless. It wasn't about impulse or temptation. It had been slow, intentional, intimate. He had looked at me like I mattered, like I was wanted, not just needed. There's a difference, and I had felt it, in every kiss, in every breath against my skin. Evan stirred slightly beside me, his hand tightening where it rested across my stomach, just for a moment. Then he shifted closer. His breath tickled the base of my throat as he mumbled something incoherent in his sleep, then settled again, his body curling instinctively against mine. I let my arms wrap around him without even thinking, pulling him closer. My fingers brushed the warm skin along his spine, and he let out a soft, content sound, half asleep, comforted. And I realized I didn't want to be anywhere else. Not tonight, maybe not ever. I don't know when I fell asleep, but when I woke, it was to the pale gray light of morning slipping through the curtains, and the faint sound of birds outside the window. The light had changed, softening the room's edges, reminding me that time hadn't stopped after all. Evan was still beside me. Though he'd shifted during the night, he was on his back now, one arm resting loosely over his chest, the other stretched toward me, his hand grazing my ribs beneath the covers. His face was relaxed, his lips slightly parted in sleep, and in that moment, he looked so impossibly young that my chest tightened. I watched him for a long time, not sure what I was waiting for. Maybe I hoped he'd wake and smile and say something that would make sense of all of it. Or maybe I was afraid he'd wake and say nothing at all. Eventually, I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could, pulling on a pair of sweats and heading down the hall to the kitchen. The floor was cold beneath my feet. The house still held the chill of early morning. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and leaned against the counter as it began to heat. My mind still foggy with everything that had happened, and everything that hadn't been said. I didn't hear him come in, only felt the warm press of his hand against my back. I turned to find him standing close, still shirtless, his hair messy from sleep, eyes soft with something I couldn't name. "Didn't mean to wake you," I said quietly. "You didn't," he replied. "I just didn't want to wake up alone." Then he looked at me, really looked, and something in my throat tightened. That look was full of honesty, quiet vulnerability. He stepped closer, rested his forehead gently against mine. I let my eyes fall shut, breathing him in as his fingers slid back into mine, just like they had the night before. "Last night wasn't a mistake," he whispered. "I know that, and I think you do too." I nodded slowly, not trusting my voice yet. When I finally spoke, it came out quiet, a little unsteady. It did mean something. It still does. We stood like that for a while in the soft morning light, the kettle beginning to steam behind us. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of something real, something fragile. Eventually, we made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, legs brushing lightly beneath it, speaking in soft tones about nothing important. Movies, songs, places we wanted to travel. But every word felt like a thread, weaving us closer together. The night before had changed everything, and we both knew it. There was no pretending now, no going back to what had been. He stayed through the morning, then the afternoon, and when evening came and the light began to dim again, I didn't ask him to leave, because I wasn't ready to lose what we had found. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The days that followed didn't unfold the way I expected. I'd braced myself for guilt, for regret, for that heavy feeling that comes when you know you've crossed a line. But instead, what I felt was stillness. Not silence. Not numbness. Just stillness. Like something inside me had finally stopped fighting. Like I could finally hear myself again. Evan didn't disappear after that night. He didn't pretend it hadn't happened. And neither did I. We didn't spend every second together. He had his own life to return to, and I had mine to manage. But he came back quietly, often. Sometimes just for coffee. Sometimes to sit with me on the porch and say nothing at all. And sometimes he stayed the night again. And when he did, it wasn't secretive. It wasn't rushed. It was calm. Intentional. Something that felt like it was building, not burning. My wife came home 2 days later, dragging her suitcase through the door like nothing had changed. And maybe, for her, nothing had. She slipped back into her routines without noticing the way I watched her more closely now. The way I didn't rush to fill the silence between us anymore. She didn't ask where I'd been that Saturday night. Didn't mention the extra mug in the dishwasher. Didn't question the folded blanket on the couch. Or maybe she saw more than she let on, and simply didn't care to name it. Weeks passed, and though nothing exploded, something in the air had changed. Not with her. With him. Evan and I had found something in the quiet. Something unspeakable but undeniable. And though I still didn't know what to call it, I knew it was real. Now I ask you, what do you think of our story? Have you ever been in a moment like that, where something happens so slowly, so quietly, and yet so deeply that it shifts the shape of your life without a single word? Have you ever met someone who saw you when no one else did? Someone who didn't just touch your body, but touched your understanding? What would you have done in my place? Would you have stopped it? Walked away? Or would you have done what I did and let it happen? I still don't know if it was right, but I know how it felt. And in a world where so much feels empty, sometimes just feeling something is enough. Let me know what you think. Drop a comment below. I'd really love to hear from you. And if you want to hear more stories like this, hit subscribe. There's always more to tell.